Welcome to the Recovery Crew podcast. I'm Dr. Bob Beare. We're glad you're here. This is produced by Deepwater's Recovery Programs and Network. If you want to contact us, please reach out at admin@deepwatersrecovery.com. We'd love to hear from you in response to our podcasts or anything else if you're interested in any of our programs. And also, please go to the website, deepwatersrecovery.com, and you can take a look at all of the different programs we offer in response to dependency, trauma, and transcending all of that and living a life of vibrancy and meaning. This is a slightly different format this week on the podcast. I was invited to present at one of the biggest addiction conferences in the world, produced by Foundations Recovery, and Glenn Hadley was in charge of this major conference, and then all of this transition happened, and so it became a virtual conference, and it turned into a real big success. There was 500 or 600 or 700 people on this presentation that I did, and they were all very engaged. So we're inviting you into this. We want you to play with us and bring your own ideas, and you can do that through email or through many different ways if you go to our website. So essentially the presentation was called Deep Waters, Trauma Resolution is Relapse Prevention. And that's kind of the underlying theme of everything that we do at Deep Waters. In this particular podcast, we're going to focus on the transcending dependency. So glad you're with us. Please enjoy the show.
All right.
Hey, guys.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Hey.
All right, folks. I'm taking a breath. Maybe, I don't know if anybody's breathed today. Anybody take any oxygen yet today? So I want to thank you, Glenn. I think Glenn was chasing a car and caught the bumper, and now what's he going to do with it? This is like a massive undertaking, and so honored to be part of this. Dave, thanks for your help. Nicole is on here too. She's the program manager of Deep Waters Recovery, and she'll be fielding questions and maybe sending you guys info that you might need related to this conversation that we're going to have. Yep, I'm Dr. Bob Beare. I'm the CEO and director of Deep Waters Recovery Programs and Recovery Network. Also Creative Life Institute. The Deep Waters is an outpatient program right now and soon to be a inpatient program. And actually the presentation today will cover kind of the philosophy that's under the work that we do. I also want to just let you know that I'm a little nervous here, but I'm also in cargo shorts and what are these things called? Crocs. I'm in Crocs. And it occurred to me that one of the things that we're encouraged to do when we have nerves when we're presenting is to think of people being naked or in their underwear. And I am absolutely certain that there are people out there right now in your underwear. So this is like the real deal. I don't even have to visualize it. So that's a little intro to, I'm hopeful we can have a little fun here today. There's a disaster happening right now, and I'm sending love to anybody who's really in the midst of that, in the fear or in the sickness or have lost people. I mean, I'm in no way going to make light of any of that. I'd like us to find a way to have some joy and also have our grief together, possibly. Who knows what'll happen here. Yeah. So what else? We also have a podcast called The Recovery Crew. You can go on deepwatersrecovery.com. Has a lot of interesting stuff. If you don't get sick of listening to my voice in the next hour or so, there's lots of other opportunities. We do a fun podcast on recovery, trauma, and finding meaning in life. So let's see, what's next? One of the things, this presentation, I was looking forward to going to San Diego and playing golf with Glenn, but also doing this experiential program. I'm a experiential facilitator. And so this is an adaptation here. I'm going to try to do a couple of experiential things, but for the most part, it's going to be through this screen. But I also do promise you some controversial stuff, especially in the industry community. I told Glenn, yep, there might be a little bracing. Somebody might have to brace themselves here, but you know, we're trying to do some cutting edge stuff at Deep Waters Recovery. And of course, there's going to be moments that are, that there's going to be conversations. So I'm just throwing that out there. All right, so moving on here. Essentially what we're going to be talking about is three topics: recovery, healing, and launching into life. Those are that's kind of our moniker: recover, heal, launch. For us, trauma resolution is relapse prevention. Underneath, you know, once we get some recovery, if we don't heal the trauma underneath, it is, we call it restless, irritable, and discontent. If we don't deal with that, there's it's a big factor in it's a big factor in relapse, in my experience. I'm taking one of those breaths right now. That's what we say at the breath. I also run the Braveheart experience at the Last Resort Treatment Center in Central Texas here. And we say that throughout the entire weekend: take a breath, take a breath, take a breath. Those of us that have been hurt, which is most of us, those of us that have trauma, which is most of us or all of us, have learned how to not breathe. And I tell those guys, if you don't learn anything at this weekend, you're going to learn how to breathe. So maybe we could breathe together. I have this that my daughter said it was too condescending to put up behind the screen, but telling people to breathe just breathe. But I'm going to invite us all to breathe from now until the end of our life. How about that? So let's start with this. Let's start with the recovery topic. A little bit of history. There might be some folks here that are big book scholars. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, who might say he's full of crap. You didn't get that right. There might be some other folks that don't know much about it. This might be a little bit interesting. The history of community-based recovery, and then we'll talk a little bit about the problem and a possible solution. So here's how it didn't work. You know, for many centuries, they've been hitting people on the side of the head with a 2x4, either literally or metaphorically or religiously or more morally, to try to get them to stop doing that crazy behavior, right? Then things like putting insects and worms and syrups in creating, you know, with induced vomiting, which is probably the early version of antabuse, worms and insects. And then there was the Keeley method, which was daily injections of bichloride and strychnine. And apparently they did some research on that, and a few guys stayed sober a couple of days, and probably because of the placebo effect more than anything else. People have used shock treatment, aversion therapy, saturating an alcoholic's clothes with alcohol, and putting it in their food and everything. But, you know, anybody that's been around long enough to know that a good alcoholic will take his socks and squeeze the alcohol out and drink it. It's like, it's tricky to get a person that has that disease to use that substance to try to get them off that substance. Many forms of punishment, physical and religious. And in the early 20th century, I just read this recently, they threatened women with sterilization. Yeah, that's a good one. All right, so frontal lobotomies. Now that one probably works. If you cut out enough of the brain, you might get them to stop drinking. But I don't think the quality of life is probably, you know, in other words, we've tried everything. So, you know, it began to work in the early part of the 20th century. The Oxford group was a group of folks. It was a very religious outfit, too religious for most of the folks that come into 12-step recovery, although there's some folks that are looking for that. But for the most part, we all come in with some kind of a wound around trusting anything, including something spiritual. Or but the Oxford group was pretty religious. And this guy, Frank Buckman, uh, found that, but he was really up to trying to transform culture with that group. And this guy named Roland Hazard was part of that group, and he went over, he was a bad alcoholic, and he went over to see, he was a little rich boy, I think, and he tried everything, paid for everything, traveled everywhere, and finally found Dr. Carl Jung. At the time, he was like the best psychiatrist on the planet. And so he worked with Jung for a while, and Jung told him, and this is the pivotal piece. Jung told him, "You're hopeless. You have no chance of recovering. I've never seen anybody like you recover." And it was just so devastating to this guy that he left the office, and actually then he had an encounter with Bill Wilson, and it was very formative in the beginning of AA. That incredible pain of hopelessness is what we call powerlessness, and taking a look at the unmanageability in our lives is like where we get started, right? So, Bill Wilson had some interaction with Dr. Jung, and was quoted in a letter saying that Dr. Jung's philosophy is the foundation stone of AA. So we can really, if anybody has done a lot of work studying 12-step recovery and Dr. Jung's work, which is vast and dense, unless you're a Jungian analyst, you probably have not read his collected works because it is massive. But, I think 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, we really should have listened to Jung, because the answer is in the soul. It's really, we're not going to get it out of this 1% of our mind that has consciousness. I also think the 12-step recovery is the popular manifestation of Jung's work. But all right, enough on that. Maybe how it began to work. Now, one of the things I like to talk about or say is that it really doesn't work for anybody. 12-step recovery does not work for anybody. Anybody who's been around there long enough, it's a little bit of a joke when somebody says AA didn't work for me, because it doesn't work for anybody. It works for 100% of the folks that actually work it, and it is a lot of work. I'm not saying it's not a magic pill. It is a lot of work and a lot of self discovery that's required. And it's true. Some of us just aren't ready for it or won't do it, or I didn't want to do it till I was 35, and it's a daily operation. It's not a one-time thing. But a couple of great studies came out this year. I was so grateful to see them. These are both the study at Brown University and Stanford University kind of came up with the same conclusion, and these are meta-analyses. They're peer-reviewed, rigorous studies of other studies, and concluded that there's really nothing more effective than 12-step recovery. And after reading so many articles that may or may not have been quite as rigorous, it's been fairly satisfying to a lot of us who have been somewhat quietly speaking to this. It's like those of us that know how it works, it's like, you're not going to get anybody to understand it unless you kind of experience it yourself. But anyway, so there's a couple of studies if anybody wants to dig into that. So what we do at Deep Waters Recovery is try to find this place between the clinical models and the community-based models. But there's a lot of models that focus on what's wrong to try and fix it. Medicaid's a very Western way of thinking. Let's surgically remove it or think it out, find some kind of a cognitive intervention that will change it. So, in itself, those interventions are not strong enough. I'd like to propose that addiction gets down into the deepest part. There's a guy named David Schorn. He's a Jungian analyst in New Orleans who wrote a book called, let's see if I can think of it. The War of the Gods in Addiction. Is really strong stuff. And he really points at how the behaviors that we do when we're in our addiction look a lot like evil. And that is not my world. That is, or it's not my expertise, but those of you that are into archetypal psychology and the overlap with religion, that's a worthy thing to look at. If we look at what these really quality human beings do while they're under the influence of addiction, looks as much like evil as anything else. So whether we like it or not, it's beyond science. It's not really measurable. And those of us that like to think we're pretty smart don't like things that we can't measure, right? We got to get a yardstick out. And this, you know, it tends to confound the scientific clinical mind. But, and that's, you know, you notice that those of you that have been in graduate school for psychology, almost all graduate programs, you'll notice that Jung's psychology gets pretty short shrift. There's not a whole lot of time spent on it, mostly because the professor really needs to do some of his own work to even be able to present it. And, you know, feelings don't, in academia, if there's a feeling that gets loose in the hallway, there's somebody with a broom trying to extinguish it. So, you know, I hate to use the S word. It's a very controversial word, maybe not with this crowd, but it takes some kind of a spiritual transformation. One addict to another. It's the only sustainable and reliable intervention. Not to say that all the other interventions aren't of use, of value, but for the sustainable long-term, the results are in. It takes another alcoholic, another love addict, another gambling addict, another food addict, another screen addict to help another addict. So, all right. And so that's my segue to it's bigger than alcohol. Let's see, is my time up? Nope. I can keep talking for a little while. I'm going to get you guys involved here in a minute, but I want to get some of this out. So it's bigger than alcohol, 67,000. I think these are 2017 statistics. Maybe some of you statistics folks will, these might be slightly off, but 67,000 alcohol deaths a year, 72,000 overdose deaths. These are getting a lot of press. We're putting a lot of attention on those. I think there's a couple of other problems that I'd like to bring onto the screen a little more vividly. 47,000 suicides. And why would I be talking about that in an addiction presentation? Well, we'll get to it in a moment. And maybe even more relevant, 2.8 million obesity-related deaths a year. All right, so I'm taking another breath. This is actually the one that got me into recovery 30 years ago, love addiction. There's a study at UT, University of Texas, in 2015. They interviewed, I don't know, it was a pretty rigorous study, and they're graduate students. So that piece of it, it's not the full population, but they asked them a variety of questions. One of them was, what was the thing that pushed you over the edge for suicide? More than half of them said emotional or physical pain, and more than half of them said also relationship problems. And they did not distinguish what the emotional, in that first one, emotional and physical pain, what the emotions were. I suspect some of that had to do with relational issues as well. The point being, some kind of a breakup, a relationship, a romantic breakup, or a relationship loss was what made a person try to kill themselves. To me, and for the people that were successful, that did not get charted as love addiction. It got charted as depression or something else. So it's not being treated as an addiction. Love, is good, and love is lethal. I just made that up. I don't know if that's too controversial, or maybe it's just really catchy, but it has been lethal, almost lethal for me. Pia Melody, who worked out of the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona for a long time. There's a lot of great stuff. Actually, half of my stuff comes originally out of that work that started in the 90s there. But she wrote a book called Facing Codependency, which to me is the go-to book on that topic. And then subsequently she wrote Facing Love Addiction. And she refers to love addiction as advanced codependency. And So, I don't know that there's a few treatment centers that are really focused on working on love addiction. I know, I can't remember the presentation that was given, the detox one a couple of days ago, but I know that they're really on it. In California, they have a 12-step program, LAA, Love Addicts Anonymous. For the rest of us, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous is the program of choice, but we really need to bring it more fully into the treatment world. That's my point. All right, and here's the big one. 3 million people are dropping dead from obesity-related disorders, right? So, and $60 billion being spent on diets. Most of obesity is due to an addiction called food addiction. And, I know that's controversial for the eating disorder folks. I've actually had these conversations. This is just my perspective. It does come from quite a bit of experience, but I know there's other perspectives. These disorders, these deaths are not being charted as died due to untreated food addiction. It's because of heart disease or something else. And this is something else that I'm just suggesting we take a look at as treatment professionals, that this is a thing and there is a solution, and it's the same solution. The program Food Addicts Anonymous, Food Addicts in Recovery, is a program that's really treating. It's pretty rigid outfit. When people first go there, it's weighing and measuring food. Oh my God. And I don't want to turn anybody off, but it is really a doorway to freedom. It has been for me. I'm a little off my program right now, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But there is a solution, and I'm grateful for it. Yeah. All right. So the dilemma, maybe it's beyond human aid. Maybe our egos, the therapist in me that's been doing this for so long, that thinks I have a solution for this, is maybe it's a little bit exaggerated. Maybe we have to find ways to help ourselves and our clients find a spiritual cure. That's the point. I just want us to be with, maybe not slam into a decision about it one way or another. So there you have it. Thanks for being with us on this episode of the Recovery Crew podcast here at Deep Waters. This was a little bit of a different format. This is from the IIR conference, the Innovations in Recovery conference from Foundations Recovery. And I want to thank Glenn Hadley once again for putting this thing together. And so be with us next time. Next week, Stephen Long, who is one of those guys that really takes the essence of 12-step recovery into every corner of his life, and you'll be entertained and learn a lot about, especially the 5th step. We're going to be talking about the 5th step next week, and then the week after that will be the next part of this series. We'll be talking about healing trauma. So be with us then. So contact us at admin@deepwatersrecovery.com, or you can call us at 512-677-7847. That's 512-677-7847. We're on all the podcast platforms, all the social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn. I don't know if we're on Snapchat. I don't think we're a Snapchat outfit, but we are an Instagram outfit. And so we are ubiquitous. We're everywhere. And so thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time. You're swimming in the deep waters now.